Here in the UK, the Home Office has confirmed that Hadush Kebatu, the migrant sex offender who was rearrested after going missing last weekend, has been deported from Britain to Ethiopia. Kebatu was convicted of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman in Epping, that's east of London, while living in an asylum hotel, but was mistakenly set free by prison staff last week. He was then found by police in North London on Sunday. We've also heard from the British Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who has said she has pulled every lever to deport Kebatu and remove him from British soil, adding she is pleased to see the child sex offender deported. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, Henry Zethman, who's live with us from Westminster. Hi, Henry. What more do we know of the deportation overnight?
Well, we know that he was put on a flight in the UK yesterday evening and landed in Ethiopia first thing this morning UK time. So the announcement, slightly unusually, came from the Home Office even before 6 a.m. Here in the UK. And I think the fact that they wanted to get it out there straight away speaks to what a significant case this had become in the UK. Twice over, really. First in the summer when Hadush Kebatu became, I think it's fair to say, pretty notorious because he was living in a hotel in Epping, a hotel that was housing asylum seekers, as you say, east of London, at the time that he committed these offences for which he was later convicted, sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl and also a woman. But then it also became especially high profile just in the last few days because on Friday he was accidentally released from prison. The Metropolitan Police eventually rearrested him on Sunday, and I think the government will be very pleased with how quickly they've managed to get him out of the country after that.
The deportation is done, Henry, but of course the political fallout continues.
Very much so. Very strong language from Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, today, talking about how this vile child sex offender has been deported. Our streets are safer because of it. But also interesting to hear from David Lammy, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, but also the Justice Secretary, which means he oversees ultimately the prison service. And he is saying, I've been clear from the outset that a mistake of this nature, that's the accidental release, is unacceptable and we must get to the bottom of what happened. And he's talking about an independent investigation which he has established into the circumstances of that accidental release. That's only meant to take 6 weeks or so, so I think we'll be hearing a lot more about this before long.
Henry Zethman in Westminster, thanks very much indeed. Well, let us turn to Home Affairs commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper when she was Shadow Home Secretary. That's Danny Shaw. Hi, Danny. Henry Zethman talking there about the independent inquiry after this shambles, as many are calling it. What is that inquiry likely to focus on, do you think?
Well, the inquiry has to get to the bottom of exactly how Hadush Kebatu came to be released in error. Was that a mistake by one individual, or were there a series of people who made blunders? Was it simply a question of the wrong paperwork being submitted? And how was it that a number of times after he'd been let out the prison gates, he kept coming back to Chelmsford Prison asking officers for instructions about where he should go, and at that point it would appear prison officers didn't realise that he shouldn't have been released into the community. He should have been put on a prison van and taken to an immigration centre. So a number of questions for the inquiry to get to the bottom of relating to that particular release in error, but also it will have to look across the piece because this is happening every week. 5 people are released from prison by mistake every week. Some of them have served longer in custody than they ought to have done. Some of them are released before their scheduled release date. So the inquiry's got to look at the systemic issues that are causing this to happen. In particular, we hear that the computer system can't operate because of lack of Wi-Fi in prisons, and so this is all done by hand on paper. That also has to be rectified, I would have thought.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, in the year to March 2025, apparently 262 prisoners were released in error. That is an increase of 128% on the previous year. So what kind of measures can and should be put in place to stop this from happening time and time again?
Well, David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, has already put in place some emergency measures to ensure that, there aren't these cases happening this week and the next few weeks, because that would be politically hugely damaging for the government if there was another high-profile release in error. So he's drawn up a checklist that deputy governors in prisons have to go through before prisoners are released to ensure that They're being released appropriately with all the measures in place. Some prisoners, of course, are released on an electronic tag. Some have conditions attached to their release. Some have restraining orders or non-molestation orders, places that they're not allowed to go to. All those measures have to be in place when prisoners are released. So there are now more stringent checks on that. Whether that going forward can be sustained over many weeks, because it creates quite an administrative burden on prison staff, or whether something more fundamental needs to be put in place, like a new computer system that can be operated, I think that's what the inquiry has to get to the bottom of.
And this has become such a controversial issue, I mean, playing into the fact that migration, of course, has shot to the top of voters' agenda over the summer, not least because of the populist party Reform UK. I mean, there's also controversy now over closing these asylum hotels and where the migrants who are housed there could be put, not least controversy over the choice of military barracks in different parts of Britain.
Yeah, I mean, this individual case wasn't just a failure on the part of the prison authorities. It also demonstrated the problems with the asylum system, because this individual had come across to the UK on a small boat, which is something the government is trying to stop. Then he was housed at an asylum hotel, but the government is pledging to close those hotels, and that sparked a lot of disturbance and unrest. And we're hearing this week that their plans to close asylum hotels will be partially achieved by moving people into bigger centres on army bases and so on military bases. That in itself is going to create problems, because the MPs in those areas where those bases are going to be sited, and where suddenly they may have hundreds of asylum seekers coming to live, are not happy about that. And you can understand that they will be raising objections. So whichever way the government moves in this to try and solve this, it's going to come up against obstacles. The key thing is to reduce the number of people who are in the asylum system, full stop. And once you can get it down to the numbers of around 70,000, they can be housed in the accommodation that is really designated for them, which tends to be flats and houses across the country. And until that point, I still think we're going to have problems here.
Home Affairs commentator Danny Shaw, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts this morning.